The continually ascending progress, represented by a series of uphill climbs, each with its peak experience, is a variant of the path of ascension, represented by Jacob's ladder, the spiraling rise into the heavens toward the kingdom of God, with God himself beckoning at the high point, on the apex of the highest conceivable mount. There are many famous phrases in the Bible, and a still small voice is certainly one of them. It is at this moment that Elijah, and through him, mankind, comes to understand that God is not in the wind, no matter its ferocity, nor in the earthquake, regardless of its magnitude, but is something within, the voice of conscience itself, the internal guide to what is right and wrong. That autonomous spirit that resides in each soul and shames us before ourselves, draws attention to our shortcomings and sins, and generates the impulse to repent, apologize, and atone. God grants man and woman free will, even though he wants the allegiance of his created creatures, and also wishes to guide them. This identifying of conscience with God is made increasingly explicit within at least certain streams of Christian thinking. What, in other words, is the story, the true story of our lives? What is it, and what should it be? It is an account of our highest aspirations, our most fundamental relationship, and simultaneously, of the true ground under our feet. It is therefore and must be the characterization of the divine itself, of God, just as the biblical accounts insist. And what is this? Conscience, calling, inspiration, adventure, enthusiasm, curiosity, even temptation, and as much more. God, in this formulation, is the spirit that leads up. Man is the being who struggles with that spirit with every decision, because a decision is a matter of prioritization. At every moment of consciousness, we are fated to wrestle with God. How is God presented in Genesis? As an animated spirit, creative, mobile, and active, something that does and is. God is, in short, a character whose personality reveals itself as the biblical story proceeds. God is moving upon the face of the waters. God is mobile. Moving is something we do when we have been struck by something deep. God is what has encountered us when new possibilities emerge and take shape. God is what we encounter when we are moved to the depths. God is therefore the spirit who faves chaos, who confronts the void, the deep, who voluntarily shapes what has not yet been realized and navigates the ever-transforming horizon of the future. God is the spirit who engenders the opposites, light, darkness, earth, water, as well as the possibilities that emerge from the space between them. Your consciousness, your being, hovers over the potential offered to you by the new beginning of the morning in a manner akin to the conditions and process of creation itself, as portrayed in the opening verse of the Bible, a creation that continues with every glance you take and every word you utter. And God said, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Genesis 1:26-27. God not only confronts and shapes chaos and possibility, but does so with benevolent intent and positive outcome. God is presented as the process or spirit guided by the aim of having all things exist and flourish. The spirit guided by love, in a word. Man and woman as a microcosm of that spirit, similar or even identical in essence, charged with forever reiterating the creative process. This is nothing less than the description of the moral order implicit in the cosmos itself, reflective of the nature of God, man, and woman, and the foundation on which the idea of intrinsic rights and sovereign responsibility is based. Nietzsche. God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. What is true of words, by the way, is also true of the imaginative images and dramas that guide us, and that contain a further map of meaning representing the behavioral patterns, rituals, and manners of our cultures. They have a living center, which is there whether it is acknowledged or not, and which plays a causal role in the determination of our individual and collective patterns of attention and action. And that, much as it definitely is not all. That behavioral cultural foundation, still primarily implicit, as it is action rather than its representation in word or image, reflects the structure of the ordered and intelligible world. That world is encoded in our map in the same way that dying from walking over the edge of a bridge into the rushing river below reflects the relationship between knowledge and reality. This is the reflection of the structure of the cosmos itself in the soul of man. Thus, even when God is dead, he maintains his existence not only in the depths, but in the patterned order of being and becoming itself. This connection between the personal and collective unconscious helps account for the sense of revelation we experience when reading, say, a particularly profound book. That sensation is the expansion of our unconscious or implicit model of meaning as a consequence of incorporating more of the pattern or spirit that characterizes the deepest levels of the culture. In its deepest manifestation, that is precisely the reflection of the image of God that is held to typify the soul of man and woman alike in the biblical corpus. And that also constitutes the covenant between the state of chosen people and the divine. These two subdeities of pleasure and power might well be regarded as the spirits that inevitably emerge to possess the culture when the higher monotheistic unity is cast into doubt. The idea that the God of all gods is attention, and the creative, transformative word, the word that transforms monstrous possibility and darkness into the world itself. God's transformation of chaos and nothingness into habitable being is particularized. God creates the first truly human place of habitation. The proper environment of the men and women made in the image of God is the place optimally balanced between culture and nature, between order and chaos. That is also the place, as we have seen, of optimized consciousness. God establishes the walled garden and grants man dominion over it. God provides man and woman with almost complete freedom to explore the fact of the eternal interplay between order and chaos, God and Tehom. Genesis 2 therefore extends the characterization of God, presenting him as the spirit that warns against overreach. Against the cardinal sin of pride, something has to be the unmovable object, the sacred staff, the unshakable pillar, and even perhaps the tree for the serpent. Something has to be that around which everything else arranges itself. That is God himself, ineffable though he may be. The act of categorization is a determination of order, the order that is necessary but also forever incomplete, and sometimes direly so. Therefore, something or someone must stand for that which has not yet been brought or incorporated into the structure of order. The union of the capacity to categorize and order with the necessity of attending to that which is still outside and lost constitutes the complete human spirit, most accurately reflecting the Spirit of God. And the Lord God commanded him, "You may eat freely from every tree of the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For in the day that you eat of it, you will surely die." Genesis 2:16-17. The knowledge indicated refers to the complete mastery that would allow for what is good and evil to be fashioned, altered, and defined by human design. This is precisely what the spirit of satanic pride offers Eve, even implying as he does so that the only reason for the original prohibition was something akin to God's envy or jealousy. For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Genesis 3:5. This is the taking to self, not merely the ability to revalue all values in the sense meant and recommended by Nietzsche, but the ability to create values, to serve as the veritable source of value itself, the capability of God himself. The Spirit of God is that which warns us against acting incautiously in relation to the eternal serpent in the garden, that which advises us to beware of the temptation to take on, in the wrong attitude, more than we can rightfully bear. The fact that work becomes necessary after expulsion from paradise means that the question of what form of work best suffices or fails, what form of sacrifice best pleases or most displeases God, immediately becomes the paramount question. Man is destined to work. What then is the great work, the form of sacrifice most pleasing to what is highest? This is the central concern of the entire biblical corpus and all its literary derivatives, something truly indistinguishable from the issue of the meaning or significance of life, or even being itself, or even the nature of the Creator himself in relationship to man. After all this, the capstone to the chapter. The Spirit of God is also that which sets the cherubim and their accompanying sword of flame that turns every which way on the road or pathway to paradise. Genesis 3:24. Is there any difference, conceptually, between those flaming blades and the fires of hell? Might it not be the case that the damned are damned insofar as they have established a terrifying distance between themselves and God, a distance that makes the magnitude of the sacrifice and reconfiguration necessary to reconcile their evil with God something daunting to the point of holy terror? Why is this necessary? Why would the God who reveals lead astray or deceive? This is the wrong way of considering the problem. It is not so much the source of revelation that should be evaluated as potentially false, but the motivations of the seeker and the nature of the spirit that subsequently responds. It is only God himself who speaks when called upon, when the question has been posed or prayer offered in the perfect manner. If the reasons for investigation and the request for revelation are self-serving, resentful, deceitful, and arrogant, then the spirit that comprises the essence of those impulses is what will answer. Lurking behind all such admissions and questionings, implicitly, if not explicitly, is our sense of final destination and our ultimate priority. This is the spirit that occupies the peak of the mountaintop, or the ever-receding pinnacle of Jacob's ladder. That is the God we worship, however unconsciously, the spirit that guides our perceptions and shapes our emotions, as thoughts can and do make us feel, and most terrifying, the source that answers when we knock, ask, and seek. Matthew 7:7-8. We remain slaves to our own narrow, self-serving whims because we refuse to acknowledge even a hint of our own self-produced inadequacy. Who among us could therefore survive the kind of winnowing that would allow only what was best within us to stand? Thus we avoid the healing death of the fire that is simultaneously God and the redeeming word. Had we made the proper sacrifices, would the dread spirit of the punishing God have passed over us? These are in truth open questions. What answers emerge from the biblical corpus, piecemeal, step by step? God is the ultimate up in the upward aim. The work that truly redeems, the work that is truly pleasing to God, that is the complete sacrifice of all for what is truly highest. It is that work that God calls upon Cain and Abel and us all to undertake. We undertake that work in the twin manners characterizing the adversarial brothers. Up is good compared with down. Down is demoralized, hunched, slumped. Down is downcast, with fallen countenance. Down is dirt, dust, contamination, and multiplicity. Up is progress compared with descent, compared with failure. Heaven is good and progress. Heaven is up, and the unity of all integrated upward aim. The ultimate up is skyward. Thus, heaven is skyward. God is the ultimate good. The ultimate good God, therefore, must reside in heaven. Smoke rises up. Smoke is essence, gist, or spirit. The entity residing in or characterizing the ultimate up can detect the quality of a sacrifice in the upward rising smoke. Finally, the offering that aims up most successfully is the complete and perfect investment that best pleases God. They were trying to determine how to comport themselves so that they could bargain, formulate a contract, agreement, or covenant with the central spirit of being itself, and to do so victoriously. They were, as well, trying to formulate a picture of the deviant path, away from victory and toward failure, for the purposes of contrast, so that consort with the spirit that tempts along that path could be avoided. Everyone always has and always will need and want to understand how to manage exactly that, to select and traverse the right path forward and to avoid the worst detours and pitfalls. That is precisely the guidance provided by calling and conscience, which are the primary twin messengers of God. The covenant is not merely the bargain between present and future and individual and community, but a contract ensuring a relationship between individual and community and the spirit of individual and community. That spirit has so far in the story been conceptualized as the process that establishes order in its contending with possibility. The Heavenly Father that, or who, establishes the moral order, forbids its alteration, and punishes deviation from the straight and narrow path, the proper target of sacrifice and the judge of its quality. This is not merely the order itself, God the Father, it might be said, although it is also that. It is as well the pattern of active confrontation with the unknown that even the Father depends upon, and in some sense is. These are not calls to a childish superstition. They are instead definitions, characterizations, of the spirit of the ultimate up. They are definitions of God. They are attempts to establish the axiom of ultimate unity as the foundation of the real, as what eternally keeps dread, pain, and death at bay, gives meaning and purpose, and inspires hope. God, whatever or whoever he might be, is by definition beyond the scope of human judgment, as he reminds Job much later in the biblical corpus, Job 41, 1-10, 34. God is he who eternally defeats even the monstrous Leviathan itself, confronting and overcoming chaos, underworld, and the possibility signified, not least, by the terrible dragon, source of the greatest treasures of the world. He cannot therefore be trifled with, no matter the justification. He, Job, rejects the root of Cain, maintaining his faith in himself, life, and God, and is rewarded in the final analysis with the provision of something more complete and of higher quality than all that he has lost. Finally, perhaps, Job has faith in himself and in God, but God also has faith in Job and in man in general. He is the fatherly spirit who insists that we can triumph against adversity, no matter how profound the challenge. He is therefore the spirit of encouragement that makes itself manifest in the advice of our fathers and our more courageous mothers when they say, "Go out into the world with all its challenges and opportunities and prevail. Learn to handle the serpents instead of hiding or fleeing from them." Why would God throw Job or any of us into the ring, even with the devil himself? Because he is confident in our victory. Who then is God, the Spirit within us that is eternally confident in our victory? This is another indication of what is to be properly and necessarily put in the highest place. Another characterization of the ultimate unity. Another definition of God. Out of the presence of the Lord is the same terrible distance that Milton describes as from the center thrice to the utmost pole. The same terrible distance indicated by the geography of Dante's Inferno, with the ultimate occupant of the deepest possible pit, Satan himself. That is a reflection of the moral claim that evil is a consequence of remoteness from God, rather than something in and of itself. C.G. Jung objected to this characterization to some degree, indicating that such a notion of evil risks, underestimating its autonomous nature, capability to possess, and the threat that it posed. He thus adopted a more dualistic view, which has as its advantage the call to seriousness that the hypothesis of an active and motivated spirit of evil constitutes. The alternative and more classically Christian view, this is not to cast aspersions on Jung, whose concentration on the centrality of evil was particularly apropos after the events of World War II, is also of great utility. The notion that God is a center around which all good revolves, the very trunk of the great trees of life and moral knowledge, and that hell increases in severity in proportion to the extremes of marginal existence, distant from that center. As Mircea Eliade points out, The passage from ancestor worship to theism occurs when the ancestor is divinized, that is, when he is transformed into a god. This transformation is made possible by the discovery of the sacred, or rather by the identification of a particular manifestation of the sacred with the ancestor. He says similarly elsewhere, ancestor worship is one of the factors that favors the development of monotheism. In the course of time, the ancestors are more and more identified with the god, and finally the god completely replaces the ancestors. To walk with God is to inhabit that Edenic space characterized by the absence of the self-consciousness that is simultaneously presumptuous and neurotic, as Adam, before becoming aware of his nakedness, could do the same. A man aiming at what is highest and concentrating on the truth, instead of focusing on and promoting his own self-centered interest, lacks self-consciousness, because what he is attending to is not about him, at least not as an isolated being trapped in the carnal now. Faith in the truth that establishes, regenerates, and redeems is voluntary acceptance or recognition of that fact, allied with the decision to live in keeping with that conclusion. The realization of that necessity is what is portrayed as the descent of the baptismal dove that serves as the initiation to the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 3:16-17, or as receipt of the paraclete or comforter or guide that Christ promises to leave with his disciples after his departure. John 14:26. That faith in the truth is the alliance between man and the Word that creates at the beginning of time and for eternity the veritable reflection of the image of God in which man and woman are made, as outlined in Genesis 1. This is yet another terrible truth, indicating as it does that the salvation of the world itself depends in some impossible and mysterious fashion on the determination of each sovereign individual, touched by the spirit of divine worth, to dwell within the garden of the truth and to allow the voice and the will of the God he walks with in that garden to guide his attention, action, and utterance. God is for the captain designate of the ark, the intuition of the wise that the storm is gathering, the realization that the time has come to batten down the hatches and to make the house shipshape. God is for Noah by definition what guides him, what seizes him as he makes his way forward, no matter what he decides to do. All his choices must therefore be properly construed as decisions and acts of faith, because he does not and cannot truly know what is coming. Why conceptualize this specifically as faith in God? Because Noah must elevate something to the highest place, something that therefore is functionally equivalent to God, so that every other choice has been sacrificed and forgone, that which now guides established as fundamental or superordinate, and movement forward made possible. The fact that this uniting spirit is God would remain true even if Noah explicitly disavowed any so-called religious belief. Belief in something beyond what is known is a prerequisite for attention and action on behalf of any creature who, like man, is and must remain fundamentally ignorant. This is true for every man and woman who has ever existed, exists now, and will ever exist. Noah's belief in God is therefore not the formulaic recitation of an explicit proclamation of belief, although it could be also that but his willingness to act when called on by the deepest inclinations of his soul. What you allow to move you, that is your belief in God or in some second-rate substitute. This is a matter of definition, not least within the story we are considering. The same applies in general to all the stories currently under consideration. It is God, and once again, by definition, who is the ultimate source, foundation, or aim of that conviction. That is the very point of the text. The story of Noah, like all the ancient stories we will consider, is thus not an argument for the existence of God, rendered against the doubt of believer and unbeliever alike, but a description of what is to be held properly in the very highest of places, so that the continuation of man, society, and world may be ensured. Noah's character, and ours, is proximally his humility, wisdom, goodness, and productive generosity, and sheltering and encouraging nature, but more distally, the indwelling of the protective and all-seeing Spirit of God, by definition. And it was as true then as it is true now, that such character is at the deepest level of reality, the true reflection of the image of God. The very essence of life itself, however, is to be reserved for God and not transgressed upon. But flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. The attempt to build the tower was a sign of human arrogance and rebellion against God. God punished the builders, as in the case of Enmerkar and the Lord of Arada, by making it impossible for them to understand one another and destroying the unity of their society. It is tempting to employ technological solutions to the labyrinthine problems of life and to rise in the world as a result, but hubris and the imprudent celebration of technology can make of those solutions an even worse problem. A warning to the engineers: do not presume to fly so high that God himself feels the necessity to intervene. That state, that kingdom turned to stone, is the evil brother of the once great king, whose willful blindness enables the eternal usurper. The personality of Cain is the force animating that evil brother, just as the descendants of Cain are those who erect the doomed tower. The giant overthrown by the hero is the degenerate state. That pattern of overthrowing is a variant of the battle between order and chaos that constitutes creation itself, not least in that the rise of the evil state is precursor to the return of that pre-cosmogonic potentiality. God portrays himself as precisely this victorious force in his presentation to the long-suffering Job, speaking the truth that redeems to the authoritarian, and wrestling with possibility so that the order that is good or even very good can be established or re-established. These are the work, the sacrifice of God, and the responsibility, obligation, and adventure of all those made in his image. God, in the story of the Tower of Babel, is the transcendent being who is the absolute antithesis of presumptuous authority, just as he was when warning Adam and Eve against eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. He is the being who eternally warns, "Do not replace me with the worship of your own pride and power, because all hell is bound to break loose if you do." God is therefore reliably portrayed as what must be placed properly atop both the psychological and social hierarchy, what is signified properly by the gold cap at the pinnacle of the pyramid, what serves as the proper all-seeing eye or sage on the mountaintop, lest everything disintegrate, including, not least, the ability to see and speak. This is the God who manifests himself in the human willingness to engage in the productive, upward-aiming dialogue, negotiation, and communication that provisions and stabilizes the psyche and the community alike. In this manner, we reflect the image of our Maker, bringing order to the world, or re-establishing that order when it has been violated and corrupted. What is the alternative? The rise of arrogant pride and presumption, the erection of grandiose monuments to the falsest of gods, the invocation to the whore, the disappearance of the shared assumptions on which understanding itself rests, and the collapse of everything into a state indistinguishable from hell. So speaks wisdom from time immemorial. Our capacity to communicate is mysterious. Why can we understand one another at all, even in principle, given that we are separate, autonomous, and independent creatures? It is partly because we are very similar in our material natures, biologically and developmentally speaking. Our fundamental or basic psychophysiological structures are nearly identical on a person-to-person basis. That similarity extends far down the phylogenetic or evolutionary hierarchy. We also share much in common with the non-human creatures with whom we share the garden. The fact of the very axioms that God does not allow human beings to question when he warns against incorporation of the final knowledge of good and evil, represented by the forbidden fruit, is a consequence not least of this shared psychophysiological identity. The person who insists on the unquestionable primacy of self-definition is, after all, stating, "I am that I am, or I am who I am, attempting thereby to elevate the self to the level of ultimate axiom, precisely as the God of the Old Testament does when he speaks to Moses of his being. And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you. Is it that God is objecting to anything that might encroach on his territory, revealing a reprehensible jealousy on his part? Or is it instead that the human imagination is such that no form of hell is too low to be created by those with sufficient pretension, and that God rightfully objects to that eventuality and providentially attempts to interfere? The National Socialists were, after all, both imaginative and capable, even though they stretched their tower to the morning star and not to God himself. Would a good God then not precisely be the force that sowed confusion and discord in the midst of a false unity? Is this then not divine envy, but rather the attempt to foil the Luciferian spirit? Is this then not another revealed aspect of the unified good, by definition? That is the insistence of the author of the story of the Tower of Babel. In the opening verses of Genesis, God is portrayed as the Spirit, oriented by love and truth, who eternally generates from the primordial chaos of potential the habitable order that is good. That same Spirit is soon said to govern the relationship between the opposites, darkness and light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. That is the Spirit characterizing men and women alike in their deepest essence, and provides to human beings the consequential responsibility and opportunity of earthly governance. This creative, transcendent, unifying Spirit is also deemed to be radically pro-life and pro-child in its orientation. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth. It sets before men and women the initial paradise of being, with all its manifest possibilities. And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat, and to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat, and it was so. The unifying Spirit insists that this divine characterization of men and women and provision of commensurate responsibility and opportunity is maximally desirable and morally appropriate, hence the very, which is only applied to the doings of the sixth day, which closes with this proclamation. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. It also establishes the limits on action and presumptions or axiomatic preconditions that make paradisal being possible. To become God, in the absence of pride, or perhaps more subtly but accurately one with God, is to give up everything that is not God: happiness, security, wealth, love, friendship, national identity, as none of those are or should be God. This, of course, requires nothing less than the sacrifice that is ultimate. What, to say it another way, a variety of other ways, is the unshakable vow, the immovable object, the unquestionable axiom, the inviolable covenant, the rock of ages, the cornerstone, albeit rejected by the builder. It is the establishment in the highest place or at the ultimate foundation of being and becoming of the Spirit, variously characterized in the stories of the biblical corpus. It is the determination to imitate or incarnate that Spirit. It is the God with whom we are eternally wrestling, by definition. As Genesis 3 continues, God is revealed as he who walks with men and women in the absence of prideful and painful self-consciousness, he who attends to and punishes presumptuous and imprudent deviations from the straight and narrow path. In the story of Cain and Abel, God is as well the highest good to which sacrifice must be devoted, and the Spirit who admonishes when the best is not forthcoming. In the account of the flood, God is the Spirit who calls the wise to prepare when the storms are brewing. In the story of the Tower of Babel, God is characterized as the Spirit that must be ensconced at the very top, lest everything catastrophically disintegrate, even the capacity to utter and abide by the redeeming word. By the time we encounter Abraham, first Abram, we have met God in various ways. All those ways are, as we have intimated, the multiple and diverse characterizations of a unitary transcendent spirit. God is, variously, the creator of the order that is good from the chaos of possibility, the spirit of unself-conscious existence in the heavenly garden, the proper target of sacrifice, the voice compelling the wise to prepare in the face of the storm, and the foe of prideful and presumptuous tyrants. Genesis 12 shifts the focus. God Supreme now makes himself known as the voice of inspired adventure. God tells those who hearken toward true adventure in the service of what is highest that their pursuit will fulfill not only the deepest longing of the forward-moving soul, but also constitute the most effective possible strategy for success. That the source of the impetus to develop, personally, is to be regarded as identical to the monotheistic Hebrew God, and that the manifestation of that divine spirit is what inspires us to admire and imitate true and genuine success. It is the spirit that establishes the legacy that endures, the same spirit that brings true benefit simultaneously to self and community, and which will be most resilient in the face of enmity. This is the divine inspiration that realizes itself in the calling to wrestle with self, world, nature, and God. This is the spirit that is simultaneously God, as the encouraging voice that calls to Abram and what Abram could be, and later is the father to nations. What is characterized as God in the Abrahamic account is the spirit that eternally says, in essence, even to the unwilling, you must leave the comforts of your tent, your home and family, and journey into the terrible world. God is that which compels us outward. It is God himself. And this, take note, is another description or characterization, as Milton states, who can take even what is ultimately aiming at evil and turn it into a positive good, while Satan strives to do the reverse. God is the voice that calls us out into the terrible world and guides our way forward, if we maintain our covenant with it. Such is the hypothesis presented here. God, in the story of Abram, is the spirit that calls to the privileged and sheltered to leave the comforts of their home and to undertake the adventure of their life. Jacob dreams of the upward spiraling aim that connects earth with the divine at Haran, at the place of fundamental decision. The idea of expanding opportunity and sacrificial progression is thereby revealed to him in the form of his heavenly vision, which presents an archetypal image of the succession of upward choice. Instead of living a life of deceit and treachery, conniving with his mother, he could aim up, striving toward the good that at its pinnacle is identical with God, the spirit of his prophetic ancestors. How can a God who purports to stand for what is highest, to be more accurately that which is highest, demand such an apparently unholy thing? It is for this reason, and it makes perfect sense, once properly explicated, all things, no matter how valuable, must be offered up to God. God himself does the same with his Son, a sacrifice played out as the Passion of Christ, an offering and transformation that brings about the end of the dominion of death, harrows hell, and reconciles the sinful progeny of Adam to their heavenly Father. It should be remembered, too, that Abraham gets his son back in consequence of offering him to God. What does this mean? The best way to truly obtain and to keep the beloved child, long promised by God, is to offer him or her up to the spirit that calls to the adventure of life, that is eternal counsel to the wise, that is the Logos that eternally broods over the potential that is endlessly deep. The spirit that is God in the Abrahamic story is not only the still, small voice that calls to adventure, it is also the same unitary spirit requiring those who welcome its presence to go all in, to risk everything. Optimal adaptation requires that no light is left languishing under a bushel, that nothing within is held in abeyance, that all potential strength is mustered for the fight, that all resources are brought to bear on the problems at hand. Is that surprising, given the ultimate seriousness and difficulty of life? When life itself is on the line, everything must be given. What stone can possibly be left unturned when the task that faces us is the dragon of chaos, the burden of death, the eternal reality of evil? It is therefore by necessity that God is the Father who will even and eternally sacrifice His own Son to that which is truly holy. And paradoxically, it is by means of that ultimate sacrifice, stalwartly undertaken by that very Son, that salvation and redemption is always and forever brought about. The Son is set right by the Father, willing to do the right thing no matter what, even at the cost of everything else He loves. The Son is set right and sets everyone else right, not least by example, by His willingness to abide by the dictates of the Father who loves Him, and who is thereby willing to face even that which will destroy Him and drag Him to hell. Thus, the God of action and adventure is also He who requires the ultimate sacrifice, but, paradoxically, is least likely to demand it if it is truly offered. God defines Himself in His pronouncement to Moses as the principle of being and becoming itself. God presents Himself, arguably, as the spirit behind both being and becoming, as the spirit of divine creativity itself, as the ultimate ground of reality, as that which is behind mere appearance, whether of past, present, or future, as that which is immutable across the flow of time. Along with this description or revelation comes the insistence that those who do not bow down to this ultimate principle will suffer or be destroyed or worse, regardless of their earthly status, and that the proper state is the one ruled by respect for and fidelity to what is most real. Thomas Aquinas conceived of the universe, in keeping with this formulation, as a series of stepping stones arranged in ascending order from lowest to highest, shades of Jacob's ladder, at once crowned and created by God. Matter manifests itself in form. Existence, that is, human experience, plays out the possibility of essence. God, by definition, and by self-definition in the book of Exodus, is the underlying union of the two. God, the actus purus, is the pattern of action that is necessarily reflected by any given act, that makes that act an act, the perfection that makes all things that reflect perfection possible, not least all things beautiful, the being and becoming that is in common to all things that exist and emerge, the calling on the people of Israel to organize themselves maturely in proper celebration is another early hint toward the idea of subsidiarity, which allows the ordered freedom that exists when individual psyche and society alike are organized in a harmonious hierarchy, with everything and everyone in the proper place, up and down the ranks. That is, first, a hierarchy of responsibility, and voluntarily undertaken responsibility at that, and second, a structure with something at its pinnacle to unite it, otherwise there is no harmony. That uniting ultimate pinnacle is, by definition, the Spirit of God. What should guide those who are lost after misadventure? God presents Himself to the Israelites as what should properly lead those who are adrift, right on the brink of the wilderness, who are standing on the line between the order that has rigidified into tyranny and the chaos of the wasteland, who are trapped between the murderous armies of the totalitarian state and the bloody uncertainty of the Red Sea. How does the divine make itself known in such a circumstance? As a pillar of light in the blackness of the night, and a pillar of darkness, cloud, in the light of day. This is a manner that echoes the eternal interplay between opposites from which the world itself emerges in the Genesis account, a mode of representation with its analog everywhere and in every time. This is the divine that is not least the interplay between calling and conscience, the dance between what beckons to us and leads us forward when things are darkest, and what warns us of the danger and darkness that still threaten when we are in the light and on the straight and narrow path. This is the orienting function of emotion itself that guides us as we make our way into the future, the invitation that is positive emotion itself, hope, longing, excitement, curiosity, the aforementioned enthusiasm, and the caution that is its negative counterpart and independent opposite, terror, grief, and pain. This is the eternal interplay between light and darkness, and more subtly, the eternal emergence of light even in the darkness, and vice versa. An indication or representation of the emergence of the real and meaningful from the realm of potential or possibility in creative consort with the principle, process, or spirit that wrestles with that tohu va bohu and establishes the order that is good. It is in precisely this interplay and emergence that God makes himself manifest to the Israelites at the height of their trouble, when they are most in need of the guidance of the divine. Under those 10, according to later revelation, lurks something even deeper, the so-called Great Commandment, which has two separate elements that are in turn united in their essence. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Why united? Because there is no difference. And this, once again, is the monotheistic insistence between the Spirit of God and the Spirit that calls to each of us to treat all the members of our community as if they were extensions of the ultimate self. The Great Commandment is a meta-rule, describing as it does the founding principle, or pinnacle aspiration, of the 10 separate explicit rules. Why does the face of Moses shine when he is filled with the glory of the divine? Because whatever God might be is so much that even those who merely reflect his majesty become intimidating, even unbearable in their enlightenment and illumination, become terribly and deeply threatening to those steeped in sin. Instead, at every moment, what we experience, confront, and wrestle with is a domain of vast possibility. We do that in our capacity as veritable images of God, akin to the Logos, the creative spirit whose actions give rise to the cosmos itself, with its goodness of order. We do that as we hover with the divine over the primordial waters, speaking reality into being. That spirit of voluntary creative engagement is the first characterization of what is properly put in the highest place in the biblical corpus.